Chapter 4, Day 1. So what we're going to do in Chapter 4 is deal with quadratics, and a lot of that's going to be graphing parabolas. So we're going to talk a little bit more about domain and range than we did before. When we're talking about graphs that's not just points, what kind of statements do we make when they ask us about domain and range? And can domain look one way and range look a different way? So what we've talked about before, quick recap, when we talked about domain and range before, in this class we've just talked about points. So I could give you this, and you would tell me that the domain is the set of the set of values -2, 3, and 6, because those are the x values of these points. This point is -2, -2 something, this point is 3 something, and this point is 6 something. So those are the values of the domain. The range, well, the y value of this one is 2, the y value of this one is 1, and the y value of this one is 2, 3, 4. So our range would be 1, 2, and 4. And it's convention to put those in order least to greatest, but they don't have to be. It's not wrong if they're not. But in Algebra 1 or pre-algebra, you've done that. In Algebra 2, you've done that. And then we never really do a whole lot more with domain and range until Algebra 2. The reason, because most of what you graphed throughout Algebra 1 and most of what we've graphed this year has been lines. So if I just have a line like, let's do y-intercept of -2 and a slope of 1, rough sketch, not great, but if that's my line, well, what x values are contained in that? That's what the domain is. What are the x values of that? Well, it continues to go this way forever, and it continues to go this way forever, so my domain is all real numbers. We're dealing with numbers in the coordinate plane that are real numbers. It's going to be all real numbers because the x value keeps getting big forever in a positive direction, and then it continues in the opposite direction, all the negative numbers. And then same thing with the range. It goes up forever. As it's going to the right, it's going up, and it's going to the left, it's going down. So the range is also all real numbers. So it's not terribly interesting to talk about domain and range when we're dealing with linear equations. And again, that's most of what you dealt with in Algebra 1. So this year we're going to have a lot more different kinds of graphs. Before we move on, I'm just going to do another line on here. The difference is when you have those special case lines, like the green line here, right? That line is x equals 6. And so here, the domain is what and the range is what? Well, the domain, what are the x values? The only x value there is 6. The range is all real numbers because it keeps hitting all the y values, all real numbers. It keeps hitting all the y values. Again, it continues up forever, it continues down forever. But it doesn't have any x values other than 6. And I'll move just to back to the other part of the other slide. Same thing if I have let's say that's horizontal at -2. Right? That line is y equals -2. Domain of that one and range of that one. Well, range, the only y value is -2. The domain is all real numbers because it's going to keep going to the left and to the right forever. So it's going to contain all the x numbers as it gets bigger to the right, all the x numbers that are negative in the negative direction, so all real numbers. So again, not terribly interesting to talk about that with linear equations. In Algebra 2, we're going to deal with a lot of parabolas. So if I have a parabola here that starts at, I'm drawing this super quick, but its vertex is -3, 1. Think about what it looks like. Even though we haven't talked about these a lot yet, I want you to think about it. It's getting wider and wider as it gets taller that way, and it's getting wider and wider as it gets taller that way. So the domain is going to be all real numbers because it's going to be getting wider and wider. It's going to take all the x values up. The range, does it contain all the y values? Well, it's going to keep getting taller and taller, but it never gets below here. That's its low point. That's its minimum. Minimum's going to be very important. And so the range is only going to be where y is greater than or equal to 1. It never gets down to 0. It never gets down to the negatives. It doesn't ever get down here. So the range is only 1 and bigger. Now let's just kind of look at some random graphs that we'll see this year. And I understand that since we haven't seen them yet, you might not be sure about what's happening, but I want you to kind of just get used to looking at them, even if you don't know. That's a good skill to have. So, I could do that better. You don't know better, though. Okay. It's kind of like a parabola going one way, and then sort of like a parabola going the other way. The key is, if you're looking at this, it's really apparent that the x's are going to go forever in both directions. So the domain is going to be all real numbers. Right? It's going forever that way, it's going forever that way. Then you have to decide, is it going forever up? Well, you can kind of see it's on the rise. It's not like it's going to change again. So it's going to keep going up forever, very much more slowly than it goes over. It goes over very quickly. It just goes up very slowly. And also, just like a parabola, it keeps getting wider and wider and wider. So it's going to be going down also forever. So this time the range is also going to be all real numbers. I guess I should put numbers in there, huh? And before I change to a different slide, I do want to go back and talk about the parabola for just 1 second. Remember, parabolas are not test tubes. They don't swoop in. They're not straight up and down. So they go this way and they swoop up and they get wider and wider and wider. And over this way, they get wider and wider and wider. And so it's kind of like a V, but with a rounded bottom. Some other random graphs, and I am not 100% concerned that you get all of these right on your assignment. I really am just trying to get you to think. And I'm also trying to get you to be more comfortable just taking a guess and talking about things. Remember, chapter 4 is very important, and it's going to require you talking to your neighbor and comparing what you think. So, what if I have something I've never seen? We're going to graph these this year. You're getting tired of hearing that. Let's look at a couple graphs that you might not have seen yet. Again, my whole key in this is not necessarily for you to get all these right. It's just for you to get used to the habit of thinking about it. So I'm drawing something we're going to graph late this year. Kind of looks like a parabola on its side, right? And I'm going to make a matching one over here. Should be matching, should be a mirror image. Mine's probably not going to be real pretty. Okay, we're going to say those are a mirror image. So, question is domain and range. Well, let's see. Domain. Does it hit all the x values? Well, it hits the x values going this way, but it stops here. And it hits all the x values this way, but it stops here. So it covers all the bigger x values and all the smaller x values. Kind of looks like one of those OR statements, right? The domain is the x values that are greater than or equal to 4 and the x values that are less than or equal to -4. It doesn't include the stuff in the middle. The range, it is going up forever as it gets wider and down forever as it gets wider. So that's going to be all real numbers. And let's do one more. How about, I'm going to start with some points here. Also very rough sketch. It's a flying saucer. No. It's an ellipse. The last one was a hyperbola. Okay, so there's an ellipse. Well, what's my domain? What's my range? First off, the last couple, think about, are they functions? But that's not the focus of today. Today is, what's the domain? Does it hit all the x values? No, it starts here and it stops here. So what are the x values there? So x is going to be between and including, what's this, 1, -1? So it starts at -1 and it ends at, I think that's 7. I hope it's 7, right? I think this is 7. Yep. So the domain is from -1 to 7. And the range is from here, which is 2, to here, which is 5. So the range is between 2 and 5. So I just want you to see all the different ways it can look. It could look like that and statement where it's the stuff in the middle. It could be the two separate parts like the hyperbola above. Lots of times it's all real numbers. And again, I know you're not going to necessarily get all of the questions correct on this. I'm just trying to train you to start thinking about it whenever you see a graph. So when we're talking about the different kinds of graphs, because we're going to see more than that this year, that was just a small sample, you know, what kind of ways can we list the domain and range? Sometimes it's all real, sometimes it's those inequality things. And do the domain and range have to match? Like each time, did the domain get written out the same way as the range? No. So just think about those different ways it can look. And again, this is not an exercise in being correct. It's an exercise in starting to think about these things every time you look at a at a graph.